Welcome to School Zoned, a podcast of the Oklahoma Public School Resource Center. Really excited to welcome Greg Hudnall here today. Dr. Greg Hudnall, thanks for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Definitely. So, we usually like to start off and just say, why don't you give us your bio, give a little bit of background on who you are, and I'll set the stage a little bit because this is a little bit different where you're coming in to speak today, and we're in the middle of a rainstorm here, so if you've got a little bit of noise in the background, that's what's going on today. So we got a little bit of Oklahoma weather for you, Greg.
There you go.
But you're in town. Integris brought you in. And you're going to be speaking, and we were really excited about this topic, suicide prevention, because this is something that we know our schools grapple with quite a bit, and so really wanted to jump into that topic. But before we do, why don't you tell us your bio and sort of your background, how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I spent my career with Provo City School District. It's the eighth largest district in the state of Utah, with about 16,000 students. I was a high school principal for 15 years. And then spent the last 15 years at the district office as a director and associate superintendent. Working with youth is my passion.
Cool. So you never really had to deal with a board quite directly, at least.
I did per se, because I was a cabinet member, but not like my superintendent. I was the one that handled all the problems, like an assistant principal. I was the associate superintendent.
Okay.
But the superintendent dealt directly with the board.
Yeah. So we work with superintendents on the state, and
Sure.
they love their boards.
Sure.
So yeah. And then sometimes they can be challenging. So
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun. Well, so you did that, and then what made you leave the school district? Why did you jump into what
it
you're
was
doing?
interesting. Provo School District, about 120,000 residents, home to Brigham Young University, was averaging 1 to 2 suicides a year for over a dozen years. The youngest we lost was a fourth grader. And
The district itself was averaging.
Yeah, the school district itself was averaging 1 to 2 suicides. The state of Utah, unfortunately, is 5th in the nation for youth suicide. And as a high school principal, I lost 5 students, spoke at 4 of their funerals. And then in 1997, I was contacted by the Provo police to come down and identify the body of a 14-year-old who had taken his life in the public park next to my school. And it was by far one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. We had to move the body, and after I got done, I walked to my car and literally threw up and sobbed. This was an amazing young man who came from a great family. No warning signs that we were aware of. We found out later that he had been struggling with a girlfriend. And so I remember sitting in that car, and the ambulance driver, when he pulled up, knew me, knocked on the window, and he said, "Greg, are you okay?" And I said, "No, I'm not. I don't know if I can keep doing this." And then, of course, he had to leave. And as I sat there, I made a vow that I would do everything that I could to help prevent suicide. I was done. I wanted to figure it out. And so the next year I was promoted to the district office. We laugh because when you're at the school, you hate the district office.
Sure.
Right? So,
yeah.
All of my colleagues said it wasn't a promotion, but it was. And so when I got to the district office, I went to the superintendent, and I told him that I wanted to focus on suicide prevention. And it was interesting. I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Greg, our focus is test scores and graduation. Suicide, mental health, and those other issues, that's a community issue. That's not our issue." So, and he said, "I don't care if you do it, but you can do it on your own time." And so I set up a lunch about 2 months later, invited about 12 agencies to come together to talk about it. And my secretary stuck her head in my office just before the meeting, and she said, "How many people did you invite?" And I said, "Oh, 12, 13. She said, "There's 40 in the room." And it was a small conference room. Mm-hmm. And I walked in, and there was standing room only. So we visited for a couple of minutes, and there were faith-based groups. There was the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. There was DCFS, Youth Corrections, Juvenile Court, you name it. They were sitting or standing in there. And I finally asked the question to the group, "Why are you here?" And Tom Powell, who was the executive director of the Boy Scout Council, he said, "Greg, these are our kids too. And we lost 3 Scouters last year. Wow. And we want to figure out what we can do to prevent it." And that's what really started my journey, really started our path. We spent 5 years developing a community model And the model, our mantra really says it best. It goes that while it takes an entire village to raise a child, it takes an entire community to save one. So it's
Mm-hmm.
all hands on deck, everybody, not just educators, but faith-based leaders, city leaders, parents, neighbors, coaches, teachers, everybody.
Yeah.
And so that's what started the journey for us.
Wow. Well, I think you should be commended for stepping up.
Thank you.
I want to go back to that comment. I guess first of all, I want to say, as a dad, that's my first and most important title. I just can't imagine. I mean, and I like to think that I know what I'm doing, but when I'm self honest, I mean, there ain't no manual for this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And if there was, it probably wouldn't work anyways. So yeah, I mean, when you mentioned teen suicide, I just can't imagine. A couple of my students when I taught died, and yeah, those funerals were just awful to attend, and yeah, if I had to identify a body, I'm not sure I could have done that. So.
Well, you know what turned the tide for us is as we were doing a lot of training in our community, and in my district, we train every single employee every 3 years in QPR. So every bus driver, lunch lady, custodian,
QPR?
secretary. QPR stands for Question, Persuade, Refer.
Okay.
It was founded by Dr. Paul Quinnett out of Washington, Spokane. If you think of CPR,
Yep.
research shows that if 15 to 18% of a community is trained in CPR, deaths by heart attacks go down by 30 to 40%.
Wow.
It's the same thing that we have found with suicide. If we get enough people to know what the risk factors are, how to talk to someone, there's a good chance that we can prevent many suicides. And what happened for us is we had a young man, very popular, athletic, heavily involved family in the community. He came to school after the Christmas holidays in 2001 and took his watch off, gave it to his best friend, said, "I'm not going to need this after tomorrow." And his friend said, your father gave that to you for Christmas. And he said, "I know, but my family will be better off without me." He then went on to tell 5 other friends that he was going to take his life, and not one of those friends told an adult, and the very next day he took his life by suicide. So we realized in our community and within our district that we really needed to involve the peers, because kids will talk to each other, but they won't talk to adults.
Yep.
So we went into Timpview High School, which is right next to Brigham Young University, 2,100 students.
And let me
Yeah,
just
please,
stop you. So
Brent.
the one question was, had you already done the training in QPR, or is this what led to the training in QPR?
We had already done the training in the community with QPR.
Okay.
So we had already started to train within our city. The mayor was on board. The city council was on board. Our superintendent was starting to come on board. So we were starting to see some change in the community, but not in the schools itself.
Yep.
We were still losing kids. So we went into Timpview High School, 2,100 students. Timpview is right next to Brigham Young University, high-end demographics. It was our school and our district that had the most threats, most attempts, and most suicides over the previous 12 years.
Okay.
So we walked through every English class, and we asked every student, if you were struggling emotionally and needed to talk to someone, list the names of 3 of your peers. And the most amazing thing happened. The same 40 names rose to the top out of 2,100. So we pulled those 40 kids out, started training them how to recognize signs, how to talk to friends, but most important, when to go to an adult to break that wall of silence.
So these are the connectors.
These are the
You
connectors,
familiar
yeah.
with Gladwell's tipping
Yes,
point?
yes,
And
yeah,
he talks about
exactly.
these just people that
Yep.
if you handed them, remember what a phone book was? If
Right.
you handed them a phone
Yeah.
book, they'd know someone
Yeah,
on every
yeah.
page.
And that's these kids. So, in fact, I was just in Ohio where we were doing some Hope Squads, and they were doing the nominations, and I was standing in the classroom, and they didn't know who I was, and there were 3 boys in the front. I wish I had a video camera in my tie, but they passed out the nominations, and this kid was sitting between the other 2, and he said, "Put my name down. I really want to be in this program." And the kid on the end turned to him and said, "You're kidding me? You're such a jerk at times. I'd never come." Now, only peers could say that,
Sure,
right,
yeah.
and identify that. But then the young man on the end turned to the other 2 and he said, who's that kind of long-haired blonde kid that sits a couple rows behind us in math? And then they talked about him. He said, I'd probably go to him. Wow, that's the power of it. Feeling comfortable going to those peers that
Yeah.
you trust and you feel comfortable. So when we finished at Timpview, it was so successful. We put it in every school in my district, 13 elementaries, 3 middle schools, 3 high schools. Brent, we went 9 years without a suicide. 9 years because of these peers and because we had done the work first within the community with the mental health partners, with United Way, with reaching out faith-based groups. But it was so powerful to see these young people, over 120 kids referred for help during that time, and probably close to 80 hospitalized because of their peers recognizing these signs and getting them help. It was amazing.
That's awesome.
We never thought
So
we'd be out of Provo.
I've got lots of questions here.
Sure.
I want to go back to the comment when you first started on this. Your boss said, "Hey, that's on your time, right?" How did you get? Because then clearly that become part of the schoolwork. How did you get beyond that comment?
It took me years.
Okay.
It literally took me years. And in fact, over the next 7 years, I had to went through 2 more superintendents.
Okay.
And thankfulness that I had reached a pinnacle where there was a level of respect for me and my position as being associate superintendent, and there was a level of trust. But what finally happened is when the 4th grader took his life. A young man came out at lunchtime, grabbed 2 jump ropes, hid behind a tree, and just before school out, took his life. And by that time, we had developed a crisis
Students
team.
saw this.
Yeah, many students saw it, unfortunately. And so our crisis team was there till about midnight. And at about 1 o'clock in the morning, I just went back behind the school and had a nervous breakdown. It was it was devastating. And I remember just sitting there, just sobbing, and my superintendent had come to find me. Now, this was a 3rd superintendent from the original one I started with. And he and I had been administrators together, had been at the district office, so there was a clear level of trust. So he walked back and found me and just sat down next to me, didn't say a word, and reached over and held my hand. And we sat there and sobbed together for about 10 minutes. And then he reached over and kind of grabbed me and he said, I don't care, whatever it takes, we're not going to let this happen again. And I think that, if I were to peel back the pages of my journal and the journey we've been on, I would say that that was probably the true moment when our district was finally on board to say, okay, we got to figure this out. The community was there. The mental health agencies were there. We as educators tend to be very silo-based.
Yep.
And one of the things I used to joke about when I was a principal is that secondary teachers tend to be very independent contractors. Let me go into my classroom, let me have the kids, and I will educate them and teach them and we'll save the world. But they don't want to do anything else. And breaking down those barriers and those silos, is a challenge. And it literally took us, we started in 1999. We got our first Hope Squad in 2003, 2004 school year, and then we went to 2013. So we had 9 years in a row. Cool. Yeah.
So I got a long-winded intro to the next question here.
Okay.
So, on the one hand, I think, we expect so much of schools and teachers, right? It's absolutely unfair, and I'm often like to point out, look, we do a great job as a nation of recognizing the heroes on our battlefield, in law enforcement. We don't recognize the heroes in our classrooms, and so I'm reluctant to say this is a school's job, to fix this. On the flip side, your story reminds me of an academy in Nashville that I had an opportunity to visit, public school. called Valor, and they've taken on social emotional learning as one of the key aspects. It seems, I don't know a ton about, we're going to talk about specifically what Hope Squad does here in a second, but it seems a lot of the work that they do at Valor reminds me of this. And what they do at Valor is they have homeroom work. And so that you have your academic work, and then they have their social emotional. They have a full curriculum that they've developed, and if you get a chance to, they've got a great website with some videos on what they do. And if you ever get a chance to tour, I mean, it got a little dusty in there when I watched, just watching middle school boys interact in ways that I haven't seen human adults interact in a way, like emotionally vulnerable and supportive of each other. I don't know about your middle school experience, but that wasn't my middle school experience. And so I was really blown away. What's powerful, they have a special tour set up. So you go in, they don't tell you much. They just kind of give you a quick window of what you're going to see, and then you go in and you watch this work they call circle work. And then they bring you back, and they said, hey, we want to have a discussion. So there's people from all over the country that were part of this tour, about 10 of us. We went into different homerooms. But they said, before we have this discussion, we want to tell you why we're doing this work. And then they put up what had led them to do this, sort of social media and, sort of the polarization. I mean, just turn on the news or, go to Twitter things, and you can see what they were reacting to. And they were reacting to depression and suicide rates as well. But they said, it's not just that. They said, we felt that this was important enough to do regardless of the impact on academic achievement. But now we want to show you our academic achievement numbers, and they're one of the highest performing schools in the state. And they say, we think, we were going to do it even if it took away from our time. But what we've actually found is that by developing the full child, we're actually improving student outcomes as well, academic outcomes, which goes against the grain, right? Like teachers say, I just want to teach, right? And what is teaching? Yeah. So very long-winded question. I mean, do you see similar academic impacts as your Hope Squad work goes on?
Very much so. When we went our 9 years without a suicide, I was invited to testify to the United States Surgeon General. And I was next in line to be superintendent. We never thought we would be out of Provo. And when I got back, about a month later, I got a call from one of our legislators and said, hey, what the heck? You go to Washington and, testify, and we haven't even heard about what you're doing. And so I was invited to testify to the Utah legislature. And when I got done, the governor's assistant came out and said, I want a Hope Squad in every school. So we're in about 320 schools in the state of Utah.
That's
our
fantastic.
Goals, we've been out of Provo this is our 4th year. We thought we were going to do 30 a year, but it's almost been 100 a year. And the legislature just approved funding for another 90 elementary schools. But here's what we're finding, and I think, Brent, you hit it right on the head with what this school is doing, is that Hope Squads create 5 things when we go into that school community or that community at large. The first thing we say is you have to have a partner with your local mental health agency. So we're breaking down silos. I agree with you that schools are becoming the menu of society. When I was at the district office, a lady called angry about, she had just visited one of our middle schools, and as she was walking through the school, she could hear all these swear words. So she called and was upset, and I said, look, wait a minute. We don't teach Swearing 101, right? I said, swearing is part of our society, and if it's going to stop, it has to begin in the home.
Amen.
And so, that's a big thing for us, is that you have to have those home partners, you have to have that community partner. But what we believe is that by enabling those mental health agencies to come on board, you're now freeing up the school counselors to do what they do, you're freeing up teachers to do what they do, and we're allowing the mental health experts to do what they do. So the exciting thing is now in Utah, we have 300 schools that have a full-time mental health person in the school, assisting the school counselors. So when I'm a school counselor and I'm visiting with Johnny and I can see some concerns, I get to walk Johnny over to the mental health counselor. But the biggest power of that is Johnny's parents come in and meet with the mental health counselor, and the mental health counselor is able to say, Mrs. So-and-so, I can get you in tomorrow morning. Can you imagine what that does to a family who has been struggling with a youth who, first of all, try to get into a school during the day, think of how difficult it is to try to get into mental health services. And so we're breaking down that barrier. The second thing that the Hope Squads do is they create a sense of connectedness. I was visiting a Hope Squad, 40 students of the Hope Squad, and they were memorizing every student's name by their picture in the school. And then when they go out into the hallways, they're saying, "Hey, Jimmy, how are you? Hey, Bonnie, how are you?" I was in the emergency room with a young lady from a middle school, 1,200 students who tried to take her life. And when I was finally able to peel back the layers, I asked, "Help me understand what caused this." And she said, "Dr. Hudnall, do you know what it's like to go to school with 1,200 peers, share a locker, lunchroom, not even have your name called by the teacher, and not even know that you existed by your peers?"
Yeah.
Loneliness is the number one challenge for young people. And I think a lot of it deals with social media and other things. And Marche, Marche, says that more time online, the higher the rates of depression, the higher the rates of loneliness.
Isn't that crazy?
Isn't that interesting?
The internet should be this interconnected world, but we
Yeah.
actually are
And that's what we
isolating
think it
ourselves.
is, right,
Yeah.
Brent? I mean, we think it's because I have all of these likes, I think I'm connected, when the reality is they're not.
So one of the big differences between Utah and Oklahoma, so I've spent a little bit of time talking with folks in Utah, is the size of our school districts. We have tiny districts across the state in rural areas. We have over 500 districts in the state.
Wow.
So yeah,
And we have 42 in
correct. Yeah.
Utah.
So I think populations are pretty similar.
We're about just over 3 million.
Yep. Yeah, we're a little bit bigger than that, but yeah, less than 4 million. So yeah, so we're roughly
Yeah.
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 I'm wondering, do you see? I guess I don't even know if you have smaller districts to compare. Are they mostly uniform in size?
What we do have is schools. So Hope Squad is in the smallest school on the reservation, which is a K-12 school with 84 kids.
Okay.
And there are 8 Hope Squad members in that school. Hope Squad is in the largest school in the state of 3,800 students, 10 through 12. And so, when you look at it from that perspective, we're across the board in schools. We're in probably close to 50 to 60% of all secondary and 25% of elementary and growing. We're adding, 20, well, we'll add more than that next year. So we're adding new schools every year within the state. The other thing, Brent, that Hope Squads do is they create a sense of safety. We've had 5 students referred who had guns. We don't think they were necessarily going to do mass shootings. It was more to take their own life.
Wow.
But I was invited to serve on a panel sponsored by the U.S. U.S. Department of Gangs and even a little bit of Homeland Security and others. And one of the things they said is, your program is one of the first programs that has identified kids with weapons. And the Homeland Security people talked about how even those individuals who became school shooters gave some kind of message to their peers, but the peers didn't know what to do about it. And so that's where we're really training our young people. And then we have Hope Squad members that monitor social media within their school so that they can recognize those peers that are...
These are adults doing that, or
These are
students?
students.
Good for
These
you.
are peers monitoring peers that are hurting. And then the other thing that I just loved, I was in a Hope Squad not too long ago, and they have a class, a Hope Squad class, just like a student leadership class.
Okay.
But in the middle of the week, all 5 of their counselors come in, and so when I was a principal, I had a list I called it my hit list, and I had a hit list of 100 kids I was worried about. 30 of them were discipline, but 70 of them were just struggling. Romantic breakup, disciplinary action.
Remember those days?
Yeah, remember
I mean,
those
they were.
days?
I remember, the stupidest little breakups. Now that I look back, those were. They were extremely important,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you've got a limited worldview. You got emotions running through you. So yeah.
Yeah, intensify that by about 10 now because
Yeah.
So these counselors came in and they started going through their list. They didn't violate any testing. They didn't violate any private files, FERPA or anything that way. The counselors just got up and said, "Okay, Hope Squad members, I'm worried about Sally. Sally's boyfriend just broke up with her. Does anybody have Sally in class?" one of the Hope Squad members raises his hand. He said, "Yeah, I'll follow up with her. In fact, I sit right next to her." And they start going through this list so that there really could be this honest connectedness. It wasn't, I loved how these Hope Squads took the attitude that these aren't projects, these are our friends, these are our classmates, and we want to figure out how to reach out to them. And last year, through our Hope Squads, over 2,700 kids referred for help and over 300 hospitalized just because of the Hope Squad.
Wow. I want to ask more questions about Hope Squad, but you keep on bringing up the student interaction, and it sparked a few thoughts from me. One, we have this bare gray wall, and I've been trying to figure out what we do with this in our studio here. I think I want to put up there one thing, and it comes from topics all over the map. So academic models. I can give you some specific examples, but what it is so many unique ideas and creative solutions are found when adults have the humility, the audacity to ask students. It seems to me you keep on talking about how, we tried to figure out how would we reach these kids, and how do you get the humility, I think is the word I'm going for, because, I don't know about you, but, I'm so gosh darn smart that I would never think to ask a bunch of snot-nosed kids for help. So how do you get there?
Yeah, it's finding that right advisor. One time my superintendent came to me and said, "You interested? We're going to build a new middle school. Are you interested in being principal?" And I said, "Are you kidding me? I can't stand that age group." My best friend had been the principal of a junior high, and I'd spend a lot of time with him, and the kids were huggy and, always all over him, and it just drove me nuts. But he had that personality, and the kids loved him. And that's what we try when we go in to work with a school is find those people that are most passionate. Find those people that relate well to the kids, that the kids trust. What most people, Brent, is that most mental illnesses began between the ages of 10 to 14.
Okay.
So they have gone back and interviewed thousands and thousands of adults who have tried to take their life. And one of the questions they ask is, at what point did you notice that you started to struggle? And amazingly, ages 10 to 14 rose to the top. And so what we know now is that if we can intervene, now think about it, age 10 is 5th grade.
Yeah.
Right? So for 15 years, we have had Hope Squads, 15 years. And it's been interesting because people have been very critical of us for elementary. And in the elementary school, we focus on resiliency, anti-bullying, and mental wellness. Middle school and high school, we focus more on warning signs, risk factors, how to talk to peers. We train on boundaries, especially in the middle school. We train on self-care, so kids know, how to take care of themselves, etc. But it's been interesting because I was in Idaho speaking at their state convention, and a lady from the audience raised her hands, and she said, "You mean to tell me that you're training kids to talk other kids off the ledge?" And I remember sitting there for a second going, "No, oh yeah, I guess we do that." And I asked the audience, I said, "Just a second, think about this. Let's take Hope Squads out of the picture completely. Do you not think that they're having those discussions already?"
Yeah.
We had a beautiful young lady, a reporter. I swear he wasn't older than 28. He put his mic in her face, and she was a Hope Squad member. And he said, "Don't you think this is too much pressure you have to carry, worrying about your peers?" And I love what she said. She points her finger at him and she goes, "You old folks don't get it." Now, I'm laughing, because I'm much older. Yeah. And she said, "When I was in junior high, my best friend was going to kill himself. I stayed up every night for 2 weeks trying to keep him alive." She said, "My father heard about it, was able to get help." She said, "Fast forward." She said, "I get nominated to this program, and I go down and meet with a counselor, and they tell me it's the Hope Squad." So I asked, "What is the Hope Squad?" And when they explained it to me, she said, I started to cry. She said, "Only if I had known then what I'm learning now, I probably could have intervened much earlier."
Wow. Do you struggle? I'm assuming especially in Provo, being located next to BYU, you have a pretty high Mormon population.
Very much so, yeah.
Here in Oklahoma, we have some Mormon, but Christian writ large, right?
Yeah.
Do you struggle with that? Does that, like, I mean, I know that there in some religious communities there can be a hesitation to talk about. I could say this if my parents are listening. Sometimes it's like, my parents are devout Catholics. Wouldn't talk about the tough
Yeah,
stuff. Is some of that?
yeah, very much so. And we were lucky enough. Reverend Dean Jackson of the Assembly of God was in that original meeting, and then we had some other. We had Father O'Malley. We had other faith-based leaders that have really helped us promote that and move it forward. And in fact, I've been working with the LDS Church. We just finished a video of an amazing video about a young man that's called "Why I Should Stay," and it starts with his young life going through. It's very, very powerful, talking about it. It is very difficult. Adults, and I still hear it even from my fellow educators. I don't want to talk about it. Hope
Yep.
squads talk about it. If you talk about it, you're going to make it worse. But what we know by research is that not talking about it is what makes it. That, these kids are struggling. They don't understand what they're struggling with. And then we add the humiliation, the shame, and other things with that
Yep.
by not talking about it, by ignoring it. I'm working with a school right now. My specialty is postvention, and this high school lost 6 kids last year. But what no one talks about is that they also lost 22 adults, and no one wanted to talk about it. And we're trying to break that wall of silence because the kids are so angry, saying, these are our friends. These are our peers that took their lives. We have to start talking about it.
Yeah. No, I commend you. These are not easy topics to
It's a tough one.
to bring up. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I think that and I'm sure that a lot of the underlying issues that lead kids to this are also the topics we don't want to talk about. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's some.
Yeah.
I mean, there's depression. There's probably some abuse. There's also just the teen angst stuff that
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, you start
You know.
you start going. I was with a mother just the other day. Well, and I'll give you this example. I was in the emergency room with this young lady, and she had swallowed a glass of Drano. Think about that.
Ugh.
It had destroyed her vocal box. It had destroyed a lot of stuff. In fact, when she spoke, she sounded like someone who had been smoking. Now, this is a 15-year-old. Sounded like someone who had been smoking non-filtered Camels for 70 years.
Yeah.
And as I was getting ready to go, she grabbed my hand and looked up at me in tears, and she said, Dr. Hudnall, I believe that my generation will be known as the generation of suicide. And I think she's right. I think because of, in 2009, 2007, the American Association of Pediatricians came out and said that violence in society is as closely related to violence in social media. So when parents talk to me and say, what do you think is the cause? I always point to the cell phone. Professor Gene Twenge out of California, fascinating research on cell phone ownership and youth depression. It literally goes in hand. So the more kids that are owning phones, the higher the rates of depression we're having in America. And so, parents, talk to me all the time, and I say, don't take their phone away, but balance it.
Yeah.
Every night at 9 o'clock, it goes into a phone charger. When you're with your children, my wife, we have 4 children, and we'd be out to dinner, and she would grab my son or my daughter's phone, and they'd go, hey, what are you doing with my phone? And my wife would politely remind them, no, that is our phone that I let you use, and I'm just reviewing it. And I love that.
Yeah.
The phone, we want you to be technical oriented and adapted, but there's going to be a balance in life, and we're going to help you balance that. But, I'll be honest, Brent, we adults are worse than our children
Yeah.
with
Well.
technology.
Yeah. That comment hits home.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's. I hope you're wrong about the suicide piece because it's just every time I hear of that, and I've had some personal experiences as well. It's such a devastating thing.
It is.
So
It is. Suicide has increased every year since 1999, and the last will I need a boat to get out of Oklahoma when I leave?
We're pretty good at it,
Are you?
so don't
Okay.
worry. We
All
send
right.
out the crews. So
Okay, good,
yeah,
because my backstroke is off right
yeah. I
now.
moved
I'm
here
a little
6 years
nervous.
ago, and I was like, "Yo, is this normal?" And they're like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "This, like, the apocalyptic storm that's going on."
My,
They're like,
my
"Oh, you
car's
ain't seen nothing yet."
not going to float away. I should be all right.
I don't know.
I was first worried about when I got to the airport and it said tornado shelter.
There you go.
You
Yeah.
know, and I thought, okay, what else do I need to worry about?
We don't really use. We have the shelters, but
Uh-huh.
what I've found is that when you get your true Okie credentials is when you're standing out on the front porch looking for it.
And
So
live through the
yeah,
tornado.
there you
Right?
go. Yeah. So
Crazy,
yeah.
crazy.
So
Well, the other thing that I think we've learned about suicide is that young people don't want to die. They want the pain to go away, but they don't know how to make that pain go away. So that's why suicide becomes that option. I had a young man take a handgun, hold it under his chin, pull the trigger, and the bullet exited his eye. He was in the hospital for 3 months, and then they asked me to work with him. And so I always try to understand where they're coming from, what their struggles, and I'll never forget because this is what he told me because I said, "Help me understand." And he said, "My girlfriend broke up with me on Thursday. I figured if I killed myself on Friday, she would feel so bad over the weekend, we'd be back together on Monday." Now you and I go, "Oh, wait a minute, there's a piece missing."
yeah.
But kids, when they get to be so much pain and they don't know how to deal with that pain, that's when they turn. And I think it's one of the things that we try to help parents understand is that coping skills are one of the most important things that we can teach our children starting at a very young age so that when they get angry, they get frustrated, we're there to help them. And then the second part of it is we have created a generation of young people that we do not allow them to fail. And because of
Yes.
that, the research shows that they have the inability to deal with the psychological pain. And so it's why we see the suicide contagions and other things at high-end performing schools because these kids feel that they're not performing, that they're a burden or whatever, and they take their life. And so that's the other thing I try to help educate parents and teachers. Let your child fail. Be there to help pick up the pieces. Be there to support them.
What's a healthy way to let a child fail? Asking for a friend,
Yeah.
because I'm
Yeah,
clearly,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I've got
sure,
this as a
sure.
dad, but what's a healthy way to let a
Well, I
child
think there's
fail?
multiple ways. One
Sure.
way I used with a parent the other day. She called me quite upset. Their curfew was 10 o'clock. The kid got home at 10:30. She wanted to take the car away. The father said, "No, he'll get too angry." He said, "Take the car away." But the way we do it is that, honey, we had an agreement. You had to have it home by 10. You've now lost the car for a week. It's not like what my father would say to me, "You're grounded for life."
Yeah.
Right? So you try to find a balance in that. And then the other things, as you see your kids participating and doing different things, it's helping them understand that A, we can't afford everything. B, there are certain privileges in life that we have to earn, that we have to work towards, because we are a society that wants it right now. I see it with parents in the grocery store. I was so proud of this one woman who her daughter was trying to get some candy at the checkout, and the mother took her hand away, and the girl is screaming and yelling. And of course, everybody else is embarrassed. I leaned over and said, "You did exact right thing. Thank you for doing that." And it was interesting because her daughter looked up and stopped crying and looking at me while all of these and you could tell she was humiliated, the mother,
Yeah.
because the daughter was just screaming and yelling.
Yeah.
But the minute I reinforced that with her, all of a sudden she felt better. And I think we need more of that. What we want to do is shun and shy and, not engage or whatever. And I think we need to be more kind, more supportive, less judging as
Yeah.
a society.
I like this. I do think I'm going to have to cut this out, and I'm going to put this on some little recordings when my kids are acting up. Like,
Yeah,
this
there
is
you
for you, and this,
Yeah.
here you go.
And of course, your wife's going to do it for you, right? 'Cause
Oh, yeah, yeah.
My wife we raised our kids on a farm in Provo, and my wife had a saying on the door that was embedded going out to the barn, and it said that your friends may know where you're at, your friends' parents may know where you're at, God may even know, but if mama doesn't, you're dead meat. So my kids knew there were consequences. And I think you start that when they're very young,
Yeah.
and it's not when we're angry, it's not, when we're, but it's, honey, here's the rules of our family. We're now afraid too many times we associate punishment with teaching. And we have too many adults that are trying to be friends with their child
Yep.
and not be the adult. And we have to remember, I use the example, when we would move our cows, if you go out into a pasture, you'll see a line along the fence. When you put cows in a new pasture, they walk the fence line and they're constantly pushing against it. And if there's an opening, the cow will slide through. And it would drive my sons and our family crazy because you would get one cow who would go through the fence, but then it would bellow all night because the alfalfa, the hay and the water was within the fence.
Uh-huh.
But that's what kids do. Kids are constantly pushing limits, and the more that we can be secure with that fence, honey, I know you want to do this, but your father and I have talked about it, and we're not going to allow this. You're the worst parent in the world. Yeah, I might be at this time, but these are the rules that we have because we want to help you learn. We want to protect you, etc. I was doing a training once up north in Utah, and very well educated, bright father. I challenged the parents to take their child's phone away at 10 o'clock at night, and this gentleman raised his hand and said, how do I do that? I can't do that. So I walked over and took his phone, and I said about like that. And then I'll never forget what he said. He goes, but my daughter will be mad at me, right? He was more worried about that than
Oh, wow.
the teaching moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's not easy, but
It's not easy.
yeah. I've embraced the jerk dad. So maybe we just need to teach that. I feel like we're doing a disservice because we could talk for hours, and unfortunately, we don't have hours to talk. So if we've whetted someone's appetite with this, where can they go and learn more?
So, the first thing, and I know this sounds bad, but I'm just going to put it out there. I travel the world now. In fact, we had been invited by the Minister of Education and presented in Madrid, Spain, and Canada, and other places. And after every one of my presentations, the individuals have said, I want a copy of it. So we put it together in a booklet form. It's called Hope Squad,
Okay.
and it's on Amazon. It's like $10. It's under Dr. Greg Hudnall. But at the end of I tell our story, but at the end of every chapter, we have we call it a lifesaver. And it's a challenge that we give to parents, whether it's talking about it, how to do coping skills and dealing with anxiety or whatever. So we've listed all of those with current references that they can go to, look online, and get help that way. That's probably the first thing. And then I think the second thing, Brent, that I really feel strongly about, and that is the concept that we need to start talking about it. And if you're a parent and you're worried about your child, don't be afraid to ask. Have you thought of hurting yourself? Have you thought of suicide? And then
Thought of hurting others
or
in the
hurting
world
others.
of
Yeah, very good point. And then find out the local mental health agency so that you know what the resources are. I'll close with this story. I'm on television a lot in our state with KSL, and at the end of the story, David McCann, the reporter, he said, so Greg, what do you want parents to know? I said, I want parents to feel good about talking. And then the next morning, I got a phone call from this gentleman, and he said, can I come and meet with you? And he's a big Hawaiian. He said, Greg, I have to share this story. He said, my wife and I were laying in bed watching the news. It was a 10 o'clock news. And he said, our son is an amazing athlete, and he broke his ankle during the football playoffs. Now, this kid, huge kid, was headed to college till he broke his ankle. He had 4 or 5 scholarship opportunities, and the minute he broke his ankle, everyone pulled their scholarship offer. So he said, my wife and I are laying in bed. We heard your story. My wife goes, you got to go talk to him. And so he goes, okay. So he goes and knocks on his son's door. Son invites him, and he's sitting on the bed, and he and Han, and finally his son goes, Dad, what do you want? You don't come in here unless you want something. So then he's sharing. Your mom and I were watching KSL, and we heard this story and how important it is to talk and ask. Your mom and I have been worried about you because you've been so depressed. Have you thought about hurting yourself? And he said, Dr. Hudnall, he said, I had probably one of the most amazing emotional discussions with my son that I've never had before. Thank you for giving permission. And I think that's what I want to end with. Parents, know that you have permission to ask the tough question.
Yeah, I want to echo that on a personal note for me. I had a family member that attempted suicide. Fortunately, was not successful, and he's gotten the help that he needed. But from the outside was, this was a family member that had everything.
Right.
And the story that emerged and sort of how this happened was he was battling depression and he didn't want others to know.
Yeah.
There was this shame. And I think as a society, some of that has gone away. This was probably 20 years ago.
Stigma's still there.
Yeah, and I think that we've got to get to the point, we've got to get beyond this, I'm afraid, to talk about difficult issues.
Yeah.
And admit that we need help and that there isn't shame with having mental depression. We wouldn't be ashamed of having the flu.
Right. Or a broken leg.
Yeah.
Right.
But for some reason we're ashamed when we have mental health issues. So thank you so much for your time. We'll I think I already saw Sarah working on the show notes, so we'll plug the book and make sure that folks can get the resources. And thank you for coming, and thank you to Integris who's sponsoring you here today. I know that we shared that out with our member schools, so hopefully we get some folks there, and we'll make sure to make this not only available on all of our different podcast channels, but also within our learning management system, we'll have this available for schools to listen to as well. So
Thank you.
definitely. Thanks a lot.